Okay, so I'll start again. Apologies for that. So today what I'll be doing is I'll be sharing with you all of the funding options that I've come across in my 5 or 6 years in the startup industry, both in Australia and in the UK. And I've also had some exposure to some of the European and US kind of models emerging just because I've had involvement in various startups which have received funding over the years. So today it's all about giving you a high-level overview. So each situation and case is quite different, and there's actually a huge number of variations of these funding mechanisms, and sometimes it takes quite a bit of expertise to actually implement them. So you might think, oh, it's great. It'll be great to like get an angel investor on board, but what does that mean legally? What does that mean from an accounting perspective? All that kind of thing. So we have to weigh up whether certain work is worth doing, given the level of complexity that it might actually create for the founding team. The next point to make is that funding options can vary between startup and small business. So if you've got a validated small business, which is just running a little bit short on capital at a particular time, and you're needing to get some growth funding behind you, that's a very different scenario to if you're starting up from scratch and you've got no traction and various other things. Kind of make the model less certain than it otherwise would be. It's also important to acknowledge that different countries have different funding options. So the US is you know, there's quite a bit of venture capital available and angel investment, whereas across in Australia, it does exist. And I'll show you a whole bunch of different websites for places that you might go and start your exploration. But it exists in quite a different way to how it works in the UK or the US. So this funding piece can also be a little bit like a maze. Because, as I mentioned before, just because the funding exists doesn't mean the fund is open right now. So these grant schemes and these accelerators, they open and close all the time because they're not driven by yourself, right? They're driven by other objectives. So maybe a fund wants to increase their portfolio at this point in time, or the government wants to stimulate part of the economy that is related to what you're doing. But it's quite unpredictable unless you have got kind of like insider information, which you can gather. You can actually set up like a system for yourself to track all of the various opportunities out there. But sometimes it often makes sense to work backwards from where the money is. You know what I mean? So if there's money available for a particular kind of project, then yeah, instead of just coming up with something in isolation and going, well, we need to find funding for that, the reverse kind of thought process would be, okay, there's money in these areas and they're kind of adjacent to what I want to actually be doing. So I'm going to figure out how I'm going to make use of that funding to further myself as I approach market. So that's actually a little bit of a paradigm shift in a certain respect, sort of considering investor fit from a relatively early stage. Otherwise, what tends to happen is that, you know, founders are forking out money and there's very little certainty around like almost like the bridge of the capital bridge all the way to market and through to early adoption and scaling. So yeah, I'll cast some light on some alternative strategies that I can see happening overseas and are starting to enter the market across in Australia, which are quite exciting. And yeah, different industries have very different mechanisms of funding as well. So yeah, just down the road, so I'm in Fortitude Valley at the moment in Queensland, in Brisbane. Just down the road, there's a place, there's like an innovation precinct, and every month there is, and I do recommend if you happen to be in the area, is to come along to the precinct. I have an event called Expressway. Usually some of the presentations can be a little bit dry, but pretty much everyone in the innovation and kind of funding landscape is all there at the same time. And so you can have open conversations with people about what you're doing and just try to understand whether it actually aligns with what they're trying to achieve within their funding body. So that's, or whether, you know, there's something coming in the pipeline that you'd be able to align for. So yeah, actually having these conversations is a lot better than just sitting behind a screen and just, you know, hoping for the best, applying for a whole bunch of things. It's just like with applying for a job, you know what I mean? Like if you know the person that sits behind the decision, then it's often easier to actually align with what they need, because you can understand a little bit more about what their drivers and motivations are. Another thing worth mentioning is that, you know, advisors can be quite well connected into capital networks of various kinds. So I've got my own kind of funding sources that I'm connected to, predominantly in Australia, governmental programs quite heavily. Also, you know, angel investment networks in Queensland in particular. And then some funding coming from angel syndicates across in the UK. So yeah, do kind of take that into consideration. There are others that have gone a lot further and have kind of, you know, networked very heavily with investors. And what, you know, advisors are able to do is kind of bridge the gap between a fledgling startup and, you know, those that can actually sign checks. So just because, yeah, I guess in a certain respect, we have to kind of meet with quite a number of founders and kind of validate what they're doing and try and get an understanding about where they're up to and whether it makes sense for an early conversation to happen and for a, you know, a relationship to form around a shared opportunity. So do take that into account, that, you know, business advisors often will have capital networks. They will have had to go to lots and lots and lots of meetings. And so they're a little bit like hubs for investment. So within the digital solutions program, we have 18 advisors. And so each of our 18 advisors would probably know quite a number of different investment model providers that they can make introductions to if needed. So some of the other models that we'll be looking at is the idea of joint venture funding from strategic corporates, not-for-profit government departments. That can really get you started, because effectively you've got committed funding to deliver a particular, you know, particular outcomes. We'll be looking at small business and startup grants, and we, as a kind of like a government-backed program ourselves in digital solutions, we have relationships with all the other AusIndustry funded and you know, Advanced Queensland funded programs, and we sort of know their use cases and whether they're like, you know, we're likely to have a level of fit. There are also investor visas where wealthy business people from overseas gain either permanent residency or citizenship by making a significant investment into Australian business. So that helps kind of, there do exist large kind of gaps in the funding landscape. And so this is a way of actually filling some of those. This has gone extremely well in the UK to the point that Brexit happened. So, well, actually, I don't know that that's necessarily related, but, you know, I did meet quite a number of different consultants that were able to help connect, you know, foreign investors and startups to have that collaboration take place. We'll also look at the notion of a venture builder-led accelerator versus a founder-led accelerator, because the world is becoming more, you know, competitive. So the kind of acceleration processes and infrastructure needs to be beefed up. And I can explain how the philosophy around this has kind of flipped in many of the more kind of well-developed ecosystems. We could also look at buying into an existing business. So say that you want to join a business that's already doing pretty much what you're wanting to do. And so sometimes you can shortcut a lot of the funding requirement by actually entering into that business, using your time in exchange for equity. And then you can do things like, once you've got an equity position and you become potentially a director, then you can start to take out business loans and things like that. And that can really help fuel growth of the business that you're kind of buying into. And then there's a really interesting one, corporate social responsibility funding. So I could show you a few models around that, which are kind of exciting. Angel syndicates are another one that are interesting. They kind of exist in Australia, but there's a little bit more process and intentionality from like the UK and US based ones. They've kind of matured a little bit more, and I can just cast some light on what that really means. Then there's boutique funds, and then there's equity crowdfunding for the B2C guys. And yeah, and I've met people that represent all of these different kind of funding sources. And then also you've got family offices and things like that, which I've actually left off in this presentation so far. So just skipping ahead. Yeah, one of the funding is one of the really one of the most complicated parts of launching a business, because effectively at the start, you know, when you go out there, you've got almost no idea about all of the different, where the money kind of, where the buckets of money are for your particular concept or idea. And so you start with this massive option tree, and then you've got to kind of prune it back and kind of formulate for yourself like a mental model of all the options that you have. Yeah, I just thought I'd share with you a few different websites that actually provide quite a few options. And because it's a huge option tree, sometimes there are actual websites that you can go through and fill in columns, almost like a wizard, so that it can whittle down and figure out what kind of funding you need, and what kind of options and all this kind of stuff. So I'll just share a screen with you now. My screen. So share screen, and then this screen. Okay, so let's put this one. So let's go through. So in the UK, it's a significantly more kind of mature business ecosystem. So there's a lot more granularity around, you know, what funding is available for what use case and all that kind of thing. But I just thought I'd show you this so it gives you an idea about how, you know, how granular these things can get. So for example, yeah, I went to visit, where were funding options? Very close to the center of London. That they were doing well, and I walked into their office and they were ringing a bell every time a client got funding or something like that. So it's a really quite robust and high growth matchmaking service, because I think as founders, it's very difficult to know. You sort of need to be consulted on exactly, you know, what kind of funding really suits your situation. So let's try to, we'll only be able to go so far because it'll ask me to like enter my HMRC information, which I don't have, so I won't be able to do that. So that's like their ATO. So say that we're looking to take out funds within the next few weeks, and then there's a whole range of different use cases, like what is the funding for? So I don't know, bridging, and then we'll just put in password, just make something up. Okay. let's see how far it goes. It still doesn't like, there is a problem. Okay. Select an option. Okay, and unselected. But this is just to give you a sense of kind of how complicated it can get without having proper advice involved. So then you go through various things, and then it, you know, you have a drop down and all this kind of thing. And then it talks about turnover and green businesses. So what this does as well, which is interesting, I think, is that the UK obviously has a lot of regulations around various aspects of what it makes easy to fund versus what it's more difficult to fund. So if you're a green business, probably there'll be extra considerations or extra options. And then if you trade with restricted countries, then options will be taken away. Yeah, but my God, it's kind of mind-boggling just to think how many options there are out there, and then what we'd get if we filled in the rest of this, you know, wizard is like a short list of potential options. In Australia, we sort of have some of these things in place, but we don't have it to this level. So I guess people are you know, the kinds of sources of this kind of information, right? So moving along, I also so I went networking a lot in the UK, and one of the things that's a little bit different to our small business ecosystem and startup ecosystem is just the number of different options and models. And there's a lot of people that provide funding. So throughout my entire last 6 months, I've only come across a few providers of funding for I don't know, equipment and machinery and all that kind of stuff for existing small businesses. Whereas there's a real gap in the funding available if you're to go by the, you know, who is presenting at the small business expos. So here's another one that is very heavily integrated within the British ecosystem. I just wanted to show you a little bit more about before we step into the Australian one, obviously. So the UK ecosystem has got all of these really advanced kind of market analysis tools. And one of the things that you can do with these analysis tools is understanding, sorry, it's skipped to something. I'm not sure what it's done here, how I can, okay. So yeah, it's a tool that pretty much tracks all the significant events in the evolution of a business. So you get like a timeline, and you can see all of these businesses as they add staff, as perhaps they're acquired, as they raise significant rounds, and you know, Crunchbase and these kind of platforms do that to an extent, but this actually provides a huge amount more granularity to what's going on within a business. And if one thing that you can do in order to try to uncover what funding source might back you is to see where the money, you know, if there's a similar business that's done really quite well, then what was their source of capital? So for the kind of businesses that I've been running in the past, it's actually been the government that has been the source of capital. So that's always important to keep into consideration. FundSquire. So this works in Australia, but I haven't tried it yet. And I think it's just been launched, and it provides a whole range of different, so they say growth funding. So that means that you need to be established. And that's one of the really challenging points with startup, is that unless you go through an accelerator or some of the other options that we'll discuss, it's difficult to actually get funding because most people want to invest in growth rather than establishing a business because of the level of risk and various other things. So yeah, I reckon if this is operational already, then definitely worth checking that one out. And of course, Australia has quite a number of different websites that are dedicated to applying for business loans, and also, the various grants. So I got a grant back in 2012/13. I got the Accelerating Commercialization grant. So I was building a platform to kind of streamline the documentation process related to getting green buildings certified. So that was pretty cool. Got 80% covered with that. But the issue with government grants is they keep changing. So advice goes out of date really quickly. So that just sort of means that what I have to do is I need to kind of sign up to all the email lists that are related to federally funded programs, state funded programs, and council funded programs. So when you're talking state funded, actually Queensland is #1 in Australia. It's got the highest level of grant funding available. So if you're in Queensland, then that's great. We also covered WA, and WA has the lowest level. So if you're in WA, move to Queensland. That's pretty much what needs to happen, or at least set yourself up in some way in Queensland. So there are a lot of these websites, but instead of like reading them all the time, it's better just to subscribe to their email list, and then and you can also track keywords. So yeah, okay. So here's an interesting infographic that actually shows the breakdown of where money comes from to go into different startup initiatives in the US. So this will give us some kind of a little bit of a reality check about where money actually comes from when it goes into US-based startups. So yeah. So there's 565,000 startups launched every month in the US, and each of them raise about 78K. So the top funding sources, #1, personal savings and credit. So people take out a lot of money and they invest it into their startup, which kind of makes sense. Then the next biggest pool is actually friends and family. So when you're starting a venture, the people that will believe in you the most are the people that know you the best, your friends and family. And then only third place is venture capital. But if you read the media, you would think, venture capital, that's where all the money comes from. Angel investor are about the same size if you look at the total amount invested, then banks and crowdfunding. In Australia, I think the government would be #1. And maybe corporates as well. So I can explain how the money kind of filters through. Yeah, that's the whole thing. It kind of what happens is that there are funding bodies and of various kinds. They could be government, they could be VC, they could be angel backed, they could be corporate backed. And then the money kind of gets funneled into different initiatives to provide to different projects at different times. And it's like a waterfall of, or one of those like, I'm not sure if you've, one of those water kind of things, and you sort of need to align yourself with where the water is going. So it's really quite complicated. And so just to give you some more understanding about percentage-wise, so 38% of startups are able to raise money from their friends and family. And this is the striking one. So venture capital, 0.05% of businesses in the US, which is, where all the VCs kind of hang out. So 1 in 2,000. So it's really difficult to align with a venture capital firm, unless you happen to know them very well and know exactly what kind of project they would want to invest in. Similar with angel investment, it's less than 1%. So yeah, I mean, this idea of working backwards from where the capital is available is actually a really good strategy. I'm not sure if they've got any more statistics. Yeah, oh wait, look, yeah, banks typically wouldn't invest in startups, but yeah, in the US they managed to cover about 1.43%. So yeah, okay, and then yeah, you've got crowdfunding and all that kind of thing. So a really cool tool that I wanted to share with you is the Ipswich Council has this grant guru. So for example, let's talk about food and beverage and see what comes up, or just food. Let's see if we can get kind of like a short list of. So then you can see all the different programs that are related to that Industry Growth Center Initiative programs. So you can see that there's $241 million. And then it's important to figure out, do I align with that particular program? And if not, why not? I think Australia, in terms of the way it invests in R&D projects, usually invests in larger companies. So if you're like a solopreneur or like a very small team, then what you typically need to do is create a joint venture around it with a more established business with all the right kind of governance structures in place and, you know, proper like accounting systems in place. So that can be a way of increasing your capabilities, but also your attractiveness to the people that write the checks. So it is a risk to kind of back such a small company. So if you can be SME rather than like micro, then that's definitely the way that I would definitely position. And yeah, collaborating with those that can add value to what you're already doing can make a lot of sense. Got a question here. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they would do of sorts. And then there's a whole bunch of other different programs that can potentially help you with getting closer to where you need to get to. There's also, yeah, at Queensland level, they've got all of these different various wizards that help you decide which programs that are accessible to you. One of the good things about digital solutions is there's no application process. All you need to do is register. So the way that we kind of work is that we kind of invest a certain amount of time into what you're doing on a one-on-one basis. So you get 3 hours one-on-one plus 4 hours one-to-many, but actually you get, you know, you've got access to as many hours as you want in the interactive workshops and webinars. And that can actually take away a lot of the, you know, time investment required to actually apply for cash grants. Often when you go for a cash grant, you can only invest them in certain activities as well. So you have to make sure that you're not just, you know, that this is actually going to progress you in the right way. Grant Connect. Then there's this at federal level, you've got grants coming through. And I learn about grants all the time. And I also kind of reticulate them out to my network. So now that I know that Bonnie Allen is wanting for, you know, support with commercializing her food and, well, it's actually it's a non-alcoholic drinks business. If something specific comes up for that, then I'll know about it straight away, because in my inbox, my inbox fills up with like all of the various grants coming through from the Queensland government. And then you've also got Advanced Queensland. So there are actually quite a number of different webinars that Advanced Queensland run, particularly with stakeholders. So we're a stakeholder because we run one of the programs where all of the stakeholders get together and listen to each other about what kind of initiatives that they're running. And so Advanced Queensland is in the process of rolling out a $5 million initiative to kind of activate the regions. And so, yeah, often it's really interesting to hear about this as early as possible to make sure that you can align with that initiative and potentially put together a team or kind of join a team to go through that process of contributing and delivering on the objectives of that program. Sunshine Coast is, yeah, so pretty much everywhere has got different, funding portals, and it can get a little bit overwhelming. And that's kind of why you sort of need a network, because everyone knows, we've only got 12, 15 hours of conscious time in the day to keep track of all of these various moving parts as they shift. Because, yeah, usually they're just announced without warning, and then you've got to kind of hit the ground running as soon as they're launched. So this just goes through, there's some people that are helping, fund startups and small businesses by attracting foreign income into the country through these various visas that are awarded to people, and they have to invest huge amounts. Like I've seen one for 800K or 1.5 million or 2.5 million. So effectively, it's just a way of making the country wealthier by bringing all the wealthy people to Australia and having them invest in small business and startup, which is kind of cool. Then there are a bunch of different accelerators, but I'm not sure how well they're going. It's obviously there are quite a few vanity metrics here. I did look at Blue Chili in Brisbane, and based on what I saw that they'd shut down their offices. So it's very difficult to actually operate an accelerator program that really works because it's such a complicated process. So each of your entrepreneurial journeys will be very, very different. And along the way, you'll need to be advised by dozens or even hundreds of different people to try to navigate your way through the maze of different options and strategies that you'll need to implement over the course of time. And hopefully over the course of time, you'll hit some thresholds of knowledge and experience that things will become considerably easier, and you'll know, where the money comes from and how to get it and how to progress with it. So there are other ones as well, like this is an international one, Founders Institute. They don't invest money. So there's different kinds, but what they do is they connect you with the next set of accelerators that actually do. So they're a feeder program for, I think, either YC or Techstars, but this is like ideation stage kind of startups enter this program. And then Mural D, that's like I think Telstra backs that one. So that's an accelerator program. And I mean, each of these accelerator programs adds value. And so some of the most successful founders have been through like quite a number of them. So on our previous webinar, it was an online workshop, we had Natalie Hurtado, and she's been through about 5 or 6 accelerators, and she keeps going through more. And the reason for that is that it's not just the cash that they provide. They also help you shape your products and ventures to align with market and to start to gain more traction. And you'll need quite a bit of support along the way. So this is a mechanism for helping you gain not just financial, but also almost like intellectual resources onto your project. Also, another way of attracting capital onto your project is to appoint a board of advisors. And those advisors kind of can stamp their brand on your particular startup because they're part of your startup in a certain regard. And that means that your attractiveness to investors is going to be a lot higher. Just by virtue of having a better team. Then there's StartMate, who invests typically that they're very difficult to get into, I believe, because we've got the guys from Yodel, they're doing fantastic things. And the unfortunate thing, I think, is for founders is that accelerators have a lot more power because they've got the capital, and so do other forms of investors. So they get to be really picky. They might, some of these accelerators like Antler, which we're going to come to in a second, they might get tens of thousands of applications and then have a cohort of like 8 or 9 people. So you always have to keep things into perspective. A way of getting around that is getting to know the people behind the programs so that you've got actually like a personal connection with them. And people that are involved in accelerators can make very good advisors on your advisory board. So just for your information, I was involved in a Washington DC based startup that had raised about $1 million of pre-seed. So that you're talking much bigger figures when you're talking the US. And I joined the business to advise them, and we kept adding more and more and more advisors. And then one of them was able to attract a significant amount more capital into the business because of his previous track record. So sometimes in order to raise capital, you need to work on the team first, and then the team sort of drags in the capital. And so that means that obviously you don't just go on holiday at that point and let everyone else do the work, but there is like a little bit of a tipping point that, once you've got a team that's large enough, and particularly in an advisory capacity, then, your paths, the number of options that you will have and relationships with various funding sources will just increase exponentially. So in Australia, we've probably got about 1 to 2 dozen startup accelerators accessible at any one time, and they sort of open and close. Some of them are cohort driven. And the reason why they're cohort driven is so that it's quite selfish from the accelerator's perspective. It's like they want to have a huge number of options and they do a huge marketing campaign and push out that option to the market. And then some of the people that are in it, apply will actually be what they're looking for, and they'll be able to add quite a bit of value to. So yeah, but also different accelerators operate really differently. So Jeff, the one that you would be applying for could be very different to the one that Bonnie is applying for. So Bonnie might apply for, I think there used to be at least a food and beverage accelerator up on the Sunshine Coast. Not sure if it's open at the moment. Jeff, I think in the Gold Coast there is actually a medtech kind of accelerator, and I'm not sure if it's, and also in Perth there's Biodesign, which is kind of like an incubator / accelerator program. But yeah, you have to kind of independently decide whether these are, value adds for you, or whether you think that, they're just a bit of startup theatre, which can happen as well. So you do need to really be selective in which accelerators that you join. Yes, I'll just ask you to unmute, or what's up, Jeff?
Yeah, just to go back to the advisory board situation. I mean, most startups can't afford salaries for these guys. Is it generally an arrangement that's sorted out via equity?
Yeah, well, it depends on what country you're in. In the US, it's typically an hourly rate, but it's a subsidized one. Yep. So you need to make sure that you're offering people, a bit of acknowledgement in the short term, but also long-term upside. That's the way that I would structure it. Do pay them something, just not a tokenistic account, like $50 to $100 an hour.
Yeah.
But yeah, not $400 an hour kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the way I would structure it. And people that have worked in startup before know that it's extremely cash poor at the outset. So that's they're able to kind of just join the team for a period of time. And sometimes I just join the team for like a couple of months or something.
Yep.
Add my value and then acknowledge, like, you know, the value that I could add has now been exhausted because I've shaped the product and the venture to the extent that I know how. And now you're going to need someone else to take that further with the relevant domain expertise. So often what I'll do is come in and like try and get all the fundamentals in place, but realize that, you know, the job is not done at that point.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's given you some insight.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Now, Antler's been, it seems to be quite successful. We've had some conversations with people that have gone through Antler successfully. So they actually, one of their really strong value propositions is that they provide ongoing investment along the way. So they give you a bit of a stipend at the start to work for a couple of months within their first program. And then you apply for the next level of funding based on how much progress you've made. So it's very much a team-centric approach that they take. And yeah, like the amount of partners that Antler's kind of brought on, they've realized that more is better. Often there's like it's like a power law. The more smart people you can involve in a project, the greater chance that it will succeed and the greater chance that it will find market and opportunity. But this is actually an accelerator-led initiative. They're like, okay, well, you know, the founder's well and good, and that's, you know, you're a great person, but at the same time, in order for this to succeed, you can no longer do a Mark Zuckerberg and, you know, hang out at a dorm room and with a bunch of nerdy guys eating pizza. You've got to have a much more sophisticated system around you, which actually Zuckerberg did because of his location and because of Peter Thiel coming along at a very critical time and helping him create all that infrastructure around himself. So this is where you plug into an existing infrastructure, and you, in some programs, you need to apply for your job, your role within your own startup, even if it was your idea. So that is actually reducing the value that ideas have, and actually putting that into perspective a little bit more. Some guys that do something similar. So these guys, I'm pretty sure, have IPO'd. Ford Partners, I think, is IPO'd as well recently. So they're bringing in, you know, public money into their kind of model, which is cool. And so they provide kind of like an end-to-end pathway for projects to progress through. And I think that they do potentially specialize in things like, you can take a look at their portfolio and see if there's anything similar that they've invested in the past. But of course, you know, they have huge amounts of people applying for them. And then, yeah, there are roles. So if you don't want to do your own startup, then you can apply to work for a startup that is within their portfolio, and they pay market rates, which is kind of cool. So around the time of I think it was Founders Factory I actually applied for, there was a really interesting project. Is that Founders Factory? Yeah, the next one, which is another kind of accelerator driven approach, or venture builder driven kind of commercialization path. Yeah, like I actually applied for a position within there to actually be like an interim founder for a period of time, as we took it from, I think, pre-seed to kind of Series A. So that would have been a really interesting and rewarding opportunity, but then COVID hit. Then there's also Nova. They're an angel backed. So they've got a lot of these have got like kind of investor platforms behind them. So it's like it's a two-sided marketplace. So founders come with their ideas that are at least partially validated. They need to provide quite a bit of evidence to the Nova team before Nova will take an interest. But then funding is made available pretty much straight away. So yeah, right now they're looking at health tech. But the point is that the options that we have in Australia are quite limited, and there are other models out there that have demonstrated a much higher level of success or percentage likelihood of success. So yeah, I mean, and you get an entire team with that as well. The investment pays for the team to do all the work properly and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of cool. And in their marketing, they say that they've got about a 50% success rate, like not quite 50%, but like 8 times more likely than if you were to go it alone.
Tristan,
what else? Yeah.
Does Nova have an Australian connection? Do you know?
I don't think so. I think Atlas is the only one that has done that, but there's also Investable, which is another one. So these guys...
I'm just dealing with a company called Nova Pharmaceuticals in Australia.
They could be related, but I would doubt it, to be honest.
Okay. Sorry, what was the other one you just mentioned?
Investable, yeah, that's an angel-backed kind of acceleration process where they provide not just capital, but team and advisory boards and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so this can be an extremely powerful approach. And I think more will pop up as the market matures. There'll be more that pop up, and they will be dedicated to certain verticals and use cases. So that's really cool. But from what it sounds from, you know, yourself, Jeff, and Bonnie, and perhaps Beck as well, you're in like pre-revenue stage. So I think it's more important that we focus in on the options that are available to you at that stage. So yeah, these kind of vehicles can be really useful, and then they'll take a percentage in your business because they're investing time and capital along the way to help you succeed. But yeah, you do need a lot more infrastructure than yeah, some projects you just can't bootstrap, unfortunately. It just can't be done. Too much expertise involved, too much I don't know, too much complexity. Another one that's really interesting that I've come across via network, and I know the founder reasonably well. We exchange emails on a routine basis, is Entrepreneurs Without Borders. So these guys have figured out how to access corporate social responsibility funding to actually roll out ventures with that kind of an impact agenda. So yeah, Donnie is across in Sweden, and yeah, he's built this from the ground up and found ways to actually partner with corporates to deliver really great results. But yeah, the purpose of this presentation as well is to just show you how many different models exist and the fact that they're dotted all throughout the world. And some of them will be making their way to Australia as they become increasingly successful. So yeah, I think Scandinavia has actually been quite successful with these kind of programs. So Antler came from there, and then I think incorporated in Singapore. Now they've got a Sydney office as well, because that's obviously the most developed ecosystem across in Australia at the moment. Then here's another model that is quite interesting. It's again angel backed. So what they've done is they've taken an angel syndicate and then they've turned it into this startup giants thing. So effectively what the founder has to do is go through a program that makes them investment ready and make sure that they've gone through a huge amount of due diligence before they're even able to you know, apply to pitch in front of investors. But it's typically a very light touch kind of program. So the founder will invest in that program to go through that, but then they will be able to kind of be pre-vetted and put in front of the Angel's Den Angel Syndicate. And one thing that's really difficult about angel syndicates are they're very secretive. So it's very hard to get invited to one because the angel investors are all about themselves in a certain regard. They forget that they like to meet in these groups and they like to have like lavish dinners and things. But yeah, most of their events are about bringing the angel community together as opposed to interfacing with founders, because they see their job as bringing angel investors together, and then someone else's job is being, providing a pathway for a founding team to go from where they are now to investment ready. So what's the innovation that like startup giants have really brought to bear is that they've created more of a process and a definition behind what they mean by investment readiness according to them as a collective, because otherwise you have to kind of appease individual investors on a one-on-one basis, which can be difficult because everyone's got their own philosophy around what investment readiness might mean. Yeah, Investable, I think they just launched a clean tech fund, 100 million. So definitely worth reaching out if you're doing anything in that space. Let's see, what is this? Yeah, so domestically in the Queensland area, there are quite a number of different advisors, and this is Anthony Owen's advisory firm, and he can potentially just sit down with founders individually and just take a look through their options. There's a few in Perth as well. There's Avant-Garde Capital and something like Movino Capital that do provide this service. It's definitely worth just having a quick coffee with these people to see whether there's a match between, your project and their access to capital. A lot of the capital that comes into these kind of businesses is from overseas, because yes, typically Australians don't invest huge amounts of angel and VC kind of money. It's just like a cultural thing, whereas across in the US and Europe, they're a little less thrifty. So sometimes you actually have to source capital internationally and bring it in. But Australia does have a reasonable reputation as quite a reliable place to invest money. We've got the right governance structures, and the government's reasonably well trusted. So that's good. Then another, if you're doing a B2C product, you can, and this might be one for yourself, Bonnie, is think about equity crowdfunding or crowdfunding using product, right? So that's definitely for a B2C application. So certain, mostly VCs and angels, almost always B2B. Whereas this gives you an option for B2C, which is cool. So this again is, this has been launched. Actually, there was about 9 equity crowdfunding platforms launched in Australia. Most of them, unfortunately, have tanked. This one seems to be, it's going, it keeps going. And it's run by Anthony Owen, and he's actually located in the precinct. So you can always have a cup of coffee with him whenever you need. And so in terms of my own kind of role in this ecosystem, I feel that my job is to try to help founders wayfind, and what I mean by that is, so if a founder comes to me and they've got a certain set of challenges and problems, I obviously try to do my best to answer those as simply as possible, and help them get to the next set of challenges. And also connect them with people that will provide them options like, crowdfunding, like connection to advisory firms that can take them further, and just try to help them not make the mistakes that are quite easy to make along their journey. So that I don't believe that we covered all of the options, but we sort of did a deep dive into, you know, some of these next generation acceleration programs and the small business grants and startup grants. But yeah, just to give you a sense of like how many options there actually are. If you'd like to discuss your specific scenario, what we can do is we can set up a one-on-one together. I'm not sure if you've applied already for the Digital Solutions Program, but if not, you're more than welcome to go to asbas.com.au, and that will take you to the registration page. And then you're eligible for up to 7 hours of mentorship, 3 one-on-one hour sessions for the heavily subsidized fee of $44. And then we can actually drill into your project and try to understand, you know, where capital could potentially come from, maybe look at some similar businesses that have had success in the past, see how they did it. So I definitely know, Bonnie, that there's an Indigenous business that's doing really well at the moment. Maybe you've heard of it. Can't remember. So I think it's called Sobar, which is like a alcohol-free beer business that operates in the Gold Coast. And I think that a lot of their funding came through crowdsourcing or equity crowdfunding. So I think that that's how they got their boost. But yeah, we can always, because I've come across a lot of different businesses. Those guys haven't been through the program themselves. They seem to know what they're doing and they seem to be making a lot of progress. But we can definitely learn from what others have done in the past successfully. Any additional questions? I guess there's quite a few here. Oh, you stopped them. Yep. Okay, let's see. What other questions? What sort of costs can you expect? Okay, we've sort of answered that question. So if you need to learn more about this kind of thing, the guys from Yodel are in the process now of transitioning from a board of advisors to a board of directors. Right, so you first start off with your advisors and they're quite ad hoc. Then all of a sudden you realize, oh shit, these guys are adding ongoing value. That's great. Let's formalize to the next level. Let's actually appoint them as advisory board members. So I actually took a step back from the US-based firm because I recognized that I'd done my job at that stage. So I didn't go on to join the advisory board in any formal capacity, even though I could have potentially added a little bit more value along the way. I just thought it was diminishing returns. And then if you get even further with the startup, then you obviously join the board of directors and that kind of thing. Yep. Okay, so I don't really understand how I could use that kind of platform. Yeah, so with crowdfunding, it's kind of a difficult one. Like I wouldn't be able to advise you on that particular element. When I was across in London, there were actually people that they were just specialized on doing crowdfunding campaigns and all that kind of thing. From my understanding, there was a commitment fee, but they also took a percentage of the actual raise. And so that was the kind of business model that those consultants came on board. It's just because, you know, if you've raised hundreds of thousands or millions in the past, then obviously you've learned a little bit along the way about what works and what doesn't work when it comes to actually executing on one of these crowdfunding campaigns. But yeah, crowdfunders tend to specialize into different verticals. So you might be able to find like a food and beverage crowdfunding expert to kind of work with. But yeah, a lot of the time it looks like the, you know, teams with zero experience go in there and like raise huge amounts of capital through these mechanisms, but actually there could be some mastermind sitting behind that who's already done it 10 times to make it look easy. And then, you know, people without this expertise try and do it and they're like struggling to get. Oh yeah, that's definitely part of it. There's a lot of strategy behind it. You know, one crowdfunding campaign could actually take anywhere between 3 and 9 months to put together all of the various bits and pieces and figure, set everything up, all the marketing strategies. So yeah, there's a significant amount of work, but it's a way of getting capital onto a project and really springboarding. Anyway, guys, I might run for a bit of lunch. Thanks very much for your questions and your being interactive within this session. We didn't get to cover all of the different strategies, and that's probably because I tried to squeeze too much into the 1 hour. But you're always welcome to come back and hear more of the sessions that I'm running. The next one I'm running is called "Why Aren't My Customers Buying?" or something of that ilk, to try to decipher what's going on and what you need to set up in order to properly understand the reasons that people are not buying a particular product at a particular time. It is geared a little bit more to the B2B piece, but obviously it'll be valuable to those doing B2C businesses as well. It's just I tend to lean towards B2B myself. Okay, well, thanks again, and we will catch up shortly, I hope. Yeah, by all means, Jeff, if you want to book a session with me, you can just ask Christy, and she will get my customer support officer. Oh, Steph, I can't see you there, but you're somewhere. Yeah, and definitely feel free to reach out to me personally. I'll just give you my email now. There we go. Yeah, no worries. Oh, you're across in Western Australia. Excellent. Yep, I've spent 25 years there. I know a lot about WA. So see you guys later. Thanks so much.